Oh my goodness. So my name is Jackie Aubel, and I am the Senior Content Marketing Manager for a company called Service Titan. And over there, I run our podcast program. So we have 3 podcasts right now that are working to support the Service Titan brand and its sub-brands. So that is kind of primarily what I do, but to kind of simplify what I do, I just basically tell people that I interview people for a living. And my origin story is a crazy one. I have a psychology background. I've got a comedy background. I had a comedy podcast for quite a few episodes. And I found myself in the B2B marketing space doing podcasts for brands. So it's been a wild ride. Excited to be here. That works in a couple ways. So first, I've always worked in marketing, kind of in the tech startup world since I graduated college, because I like to say that marketers are artists without trust funds. So I had to figure out a way to make a livelihood while I was doing my comedy. So I've always been working in tech, right? But for a really long time, I was also chugging along on a comedy career on the weeknights and weekends. And I had a comedy podcast called Guilty Pleasure, which is still up, the Guilty Pleasure podcast with Jackie Aubel and Amanda Salvatore. We did about 90 episodes where we interviewed folks in the Los Angeles entertainment scene. So actors, comedians, kind of like just a bunch of different hodgepodge people, and they would talk about their guilty pleasure. So like, what are the things that they feel quote unquote guilty about? And we did that for about 90 episodes. And while I was producing that podcast and doing a couple other comedy things, I was also working at Service Titan, which is where I'm at now. I'll say it was definitely a combination of luck. One of the leaders in our marketing department was really intrigued by podcasts and was curious how we could leverage it at our company. So when he found out about my background, he was like, "How would you feel about doing a podcast for Service Titan?" I was like, "I would love to get paid to do this instead of paying other people to help me do this. So let's make that happen." And that's exactly what it is. And I will say that having my own podcast for, I think we hit like 90 or 92 episodes, something like that. Having my own podcast for such a long time really helped me set expectations and set the podcast up for success for a corporate brand. But that's basically how I got into it, is that, I kind of was doing this on the side. The right person found out about my skill set, asked me if I wanted to use it here or for the brand, and that's how it happened. Our demographic is, so Service Titan creates software for contractors. So HVAC technicians, plumbers, electricians, garage door technicians, folks, blue collar workers in North America, essentially. So, the podcast is for those people. It's for contractors who are looking to grow and optimize their business. Our main podcast, Toolbox for the Trades, which I host, is not a podcast about Service Titan necessarily, but we are interviewing people that we know through the work that Service Titan does about how they grew their business, how they found success, and we touch upon a bunch of different topics that pertain to entrepreneurship. So, for example, marketing best practices, KPIs, and how to track if your business is actually being successful, if you're actually turning a profit. We talk about building a culture. We talk about employment best practices. For our specific niche, our niche audience, there's a ton of instances where a parent will pass down the business to the next generation, to their child. And so we talk about kind of the friction that can happen there. But to very generalize it, folks who would be listening to Toolbox for the Trades are contractors who are interested in growing their business, streamlining their operations, and finding success in the contracting space. That is mainly because I personally have never run an HVAC, electrical, or plumbing company. So I had to get a little bit more general. If you listen to earlier episodes of the show, I'll ask questions that, I don't know, like maybe at the moment I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I just asked such a basic question. An example of one was I was interviewing a lovely woman, Ellen Rohr, who I now get to work with. And she mentioned the phrase COD. And I was like, what is COD? And she goes, cash on delivery or cash on demand or whatever. It means like you get paid right away. And I was like, oh gosh, if I had run my own business in this contracting space, I would know what COD means. However, that being said, if I don't know what COD stands for, chances are there's somebody else listening who doesn't know what COD stands for. So I have had to generalize it a bit because short of Service Titan sponsoring me to create my own business, which I'm not interested in doing whatsoever, I have had to learn about business best practices through reading, through doing my own research and everything. So, and, it's kind of nice to generalize it because even though our target demographic are contractors, like owner operators in the contractor space, there are slight differences to workflows, like whether you run HVAC, plumbing, water irrigation. We have another subsect that focuses only on pest control companies. So it's, there's little differences. So we have to generalize it while not making it too general. But I appreciate the compliment. Thank you very much. The original name was supposed to be Tools for the Trades. And we had all the stuff ready. We had all the logos ready to go. And then I had the brilliant idea to actually Google that name before we launched. And turns out it already existed. And I should also say that we were working with an agency to help us launch the podcast. And I was a little miffed that they did not catch that. So I had a full-blown panic attack because this was this giant project I was launching. By the way, I was launching it. The original day we were supposed to launch was March 15th, 2020. And for obvious reasons, that did not happen exactly the way we wanted it to. We ended up launching a month later. So I had this little panic attack, and then my VP of marketing was like, what about just Toolbox? And I was like, great. Googled it, it was available. So for the show name, we wanted it to speak to the people that we are trying to connect with through the podcast. But we also wanted it to be like snappy and catchy and able to be shortened. I will say that name isn't perfect. Like there's still sometimes people will think that we're a podcast about like day trading or stocks or something. And but I just think that's just, hindsight's 2020. That's how we came up with the name. So I was really fortunate when creating Toolbox for the Trades because we already had a corporate brand that gave me a starting point. So if you listen to an episode of Toolbox for the Trades, you'll notice our intro music is very Home Depot dad. There's very much this like powerful kind of, not machismo, but there's like very strong kind of like, what's the word for that? Like someone you trust, like kind of just like authoritative. There we go. It's just like a very much like, here you're going to listen to it. And the guy who does our voiceover, who intros the show, it's this like gravelly, like deep voice. So we were able, because Service Titan already had a brand, we were able to create a sub-brand of Toolbox for the Trades, but have it kind of go up to to Service Titan. And for our subsequent podcasts that we've launched, Mastering Service Titan and Pest in Class, we've also had the luxury of having a corporate brand to kind of know, okay, this is our touchstone. This is how we're not going to create anything that's going to be so not aligned with this brand. So for example, occasionally contractors will come on and curse on our show. We always bleep it. It is a very professional show. Although, I have a comedy background. I like to joke. We do get some jokes and some lightheartedness into the conversation, but it's very much like a showcase of entrepreneurs. And I think it's really important to maintain that tone throughout a show's growth because that will give your audiences what they will come to expect as your show continues on, right? Guilty Pleasure, which was my first show, that was more of a branding play for me and my co-host as comedy writers, as comedy personalities. So as someone who's done two different types, I will say that one is a lot more fun because when we were recording shows, I was just thinking about, okay, how can I make this as entertaining as possible? It's good for me to have that experience because I can still bring that to Toolbox for the Trades episodes. But when I'm recording Toolbox for the Trades episodes, I always am thinking in the back of my mind, all right, this is a Service Titan branded podcast. And I think there's certain subject matter that I want to, not necessarily, like, there have been plenty of opportunities we've done over 200 episodes over the course of 200 episodes where, like, oh man, if this was a different show, I would love to go in this direction. But because this is the brand that we're promoting, I'm going to stick on this side of the house. Yeah. I think when it comes to building a podcast brand, you just have to be, and this is advice I give to anyone who has ever expressed interest in making a podcast. You have to think about like what your end goal is. I loved podcasting. I got into it. Like, I became a fan of podcasting pretty early. I was an early, You Made It Weird. Pete Holmes's podcast was one of my, like, when I discovered it, I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And I was like, I want to get on the microphone. I want to talk to people. The biggest piece of advice I can give to anyone is figure out like what is exactly the message that you want to say, and really find that North Star for you. And that will hopefully lead you in a place where you'll be able to generate ideas for content creation and figure out like, and it'll also be like your way of measuring success, right? Like if you create a podcast with one specific goal in mind, 10 episodes in, 20 episodes in, 30 episodes in, you can see like, okay, am I any closer to my goal? Versus like, oh wait, maybe this podcast is going to be something different. I don't know, but that's my thought on branding. My thoughts. I have many thoughts. Oh, I will tell you. So for Guilty Pleasure, I love telling this story. So me and my wonderful co-host Amanda, who actually is one of our other hosts on the Service Titan Podcast Network. She hosts the Pest in Class podcast. Her and I had great chemistry. We had been working in comedy together for about a year, maybe a year and a half at that point. So we knew that her and I, like, okay, we got along great. We could do bits off of one another. We gave space to let each other like riff and do that thing. So we were like, all right, we're doing it. Podcast done. Like, we got the logo. We figured out the concept. We recorded the first episode. I edited it on Final Cut Pro, I think, because I didn't have like audio software. I had editing software, like video editing software. So I was like, same thing. We uploaded it on a Monday and we were like, oh my God, we did it. And then I just looked at her and I was like, oh shit, we got to do this for next week too. So, going back to like my pieces of advice, like my biggest piece of advice is like when you start a show, like please give yourself the luxury of having like at least 3 to 5 episodes in the can. So you are not like just losing your mind. Amanda and I had this actually we were privileged in that we were both part of this comedy theater called The Nerdist that eventually rebranded to The Ruby. And they had a podcast studio actually there. It was where the original location was, where Meltdown Comics used to be on Sunset in Los Angeles. And they had the Nerdist Podcast Network, which a bunch of different shows were on. So they had this like mini podcast studio for like up and coming shows. And we had access to that. So once we kind of learned about okay, we have to like make sure that our supply doesn't run out, then we, started banking. Like we would record like 3 episodes a day or something. Oh, great question. So my first podcast, I told you, I consider myself to be like an aspiring creative, right? Like doing Guilty Pleasure and talking with people about the things that they love and talking with people that are used to being on camera, used to being recorded. It was a dream. Like, I don't think we had any dud episodes for Guilty Pleasure out of 90. I'm going to have to ask Amanda later, but I'm pretty sure we had no dud episodes. Now, bringing the podcasting ecosystem to a corporate audience that is a little behind the times in terms of, they're not necessarily up with like the latest trends. That was an uphill battle. Like the first year or so, and I don't know if this is necessarily going to be the case, because remember I started the podcast. I started doing recordings right before the pandemic for the Service Titan show. Now I think coming into 2025, like this probably isn't the case as much, but like I had to explain what a podcast was. I had to like do a ton of work up top, like just to explain to people. And like there were people that I had to literally convince to come on the show, or just say, hey, it sounds like this isn't something that you're interested in, and that's totally okay. I want you to honor like what's best for you. But it was kind of surprising to me that a lot of people don't like to talk about themselves. I like, and I guess that's because I'm someone I'm very much an external processor. Like, obviously I've been talking a lot during the show. So it was just bananas to me that like some people in this new segment that I was targeting, like I would ask them a question and they would give me like literally like a 5-word answer. And I'd be like, oh my goodness, can you elaborate in any way? Like, and it's, I think it's an interview where if you're going to do an interview style show, which are the only shows I've ever done, you really have to find a way to get people out of their shell, but making them feel really safe about it, and like schooling your own face. And I have a very expressive face, like schooling your own face, schooling your own reactions so that like they don't feel bad, right? Like you have to very much, when your guest comes onto your show, like they're the star of the next hour. You need to be like, oh my goodness, I'm so happy that you're here. You need to try to make them as comfortable as possible. And then there are some people that just have a difficult time opening up, and, you know, you're going to have to do a little bit more work as an interviewer. But, you know, you just kind of get better with that over reps. For me, doing a comedy entertainment show for 90 episodes with people who are in that space, who can, you know, give really fun and big reactions, it was jarring going to this more corporate environment and really having to work to pull people out of their shells. So that was probably the thing I wasn't expecting to be as difficult as it was. Amanda was the one who really started doing this for Guilty Pleasure. She was like, we need to send people, because our first few episodes, we didn't give people the questions ahead of time. We gave it to, and we noticed that when that happened, sometimes people would be like, oh, dang, like I'm drawing a blank. So we would always send a pre-interview after a few episodes. We're like, we're just going to send a pre-interview. We're going to probably ask most of these questions. We might not ask all of them. We might ask you questions that aren't on this list, but just so you know, this is what we're going to try and do. And so now with Service Titan, what I do is I do a pre-interview process. So, you know, we do a 30-minute call before where I kind of check everyone's setup. Like, okay, are you taking this call from your, you know, from your nice home office setup where it's quiet and there's not a lot of echo? Or are you going to are you expecting to take this call from your phone, like while you're on the go? And then I also like use that time to tell everyone, to basically tell people like, hey, I'm not trying to like get you. Like, this is not like an investigative journalist. Like, I'm just here to like get insight from you. I think you've done really incredible things. I want to learn how you've done that and share your knowledge with other people in the industry. And then I'm also like just seeing like, hey, what's their setup? And based on that pre-interview, I'll write a series of like, 5 to 8 questions that I'll give them ahead of time, just so they know like, hey, this is what I'm going to try and do. Let me know if you have any feedback on it. And like 9 times out of 10, they don't have any feedback on it, but it makes them feel a little bit more comfortable. But what kills me is on several occasions, I've done the pre-interview and I've explained to them like, okay, so you're going to take the interview from here, right? You're going to do it. And then they like log onto Riverside on their phone while they're driving. And I'm like, I can't do the interview here, my dude. I can't. Like, I need you to be. I actually had one guest, lovely, lovely person. He showed up to the Service Titan offices, like fully expecting for us to do an in-person interview. And I was like, I never said that. Like, and because I record our pre-interviews. So like, even afterwards, I was like, I have to listen to this pre-interview to see if I had like if I blacked out and like said, yeah, come here. No, of course I didn't. So it's just, it's interesting. You kind of got to be, when you're dealing with other people and you're relying on those people to help create the content for your show, you just got to prime them as best as you can. And also, have a couple, preset lies in case you got to trash episodes. I've only had to do that like twice because they were just so bad. And I was like, I'm sorry, there's an audio issue. We can't fix it. Blah. But yeah, so you just got to prime them. Like, that's the tough thing I think about doing the show is like, you're going to have your vision for how you want the episode to go, But that is all dependent on, your interview subject cooperating, right? So you gotta kind of prime them for that. How has it changed me? Well, it's definitely given me an idea of what my skill set is. I'm a very good interviewer. There's always room for improvement, but I've been doing this, in some capacity for at least, I think we started Guilty Pleasure in 2018 or 2000. Yeah, like 2018. So I've been doing this in some professional capacity for about 7 years. So it's given me a bit of an identity, which is nice. I mentioned I have a psychology background as well. So in 2022, I went back and got my master's degree in marriage and family therapy to be trained as a therapist, because podcast host, therapist, I think there's some overlap there. I think it's changed me in that it's opened up my eyes to, there's so many different people out there in the world who live vastly different lives than I do. And I think you need to be more generous with people, just as a rule. It's kind of another thing too, is like I would live in Los Angeles. I'm from New York City originally. I had a comedy entertainment podcast. Like, I'm a sassy lady. Everyone can probably assume like what my lifestyle is, kind of. I've done interviews with people that have like 7 kids. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that's bananas. I've had interviews with people who are really, really into faith and religion, whose mission statement for their company involves, service to God. And these are things that I did not grow up with at all. Like they're not in my atmosphere. And even doing Guilty Pleasure, I was always kind of staying a little in my bubble, so to speak. And so doing podcasting, going back to school to learn how to be a therapist, it's just kind of given me an appreciation for how there's so many lives out there that are different than mine. And everyone has a really interesting story for the most part. I mean, I know I just talked a bit of shit about people who, kind of clam up in front of the camera, but genuinely speaking, like everyone I think has something interesting or valuable to say. So I think it was just opened me up to like different ways of thinking, different ways of life, and definitely been a humbling experience, I would say. I think I was very grateful that I had the experience with Guilty Pleasure before doing Toolbox for the Trades. It allowed me to set expectations for my team internally. It allowed me to set to justify my budget, do all of that stuff. I think if I were to start a show again, I would probably be a little bit more intentional about episode planning, because the nature of Toolbox for the Trades, we're a weekly show right now. And I kind of go back and forth on whether or not we should be a weekly show, because what's interesting about creating a podcast for a corporate brand is my goal isn't necessarily to break into, the top 100 podcasts on Apple Podcasts, or my goal is not to get like, hundreds of thousands of downloads an episode. My goal is to create content that supports our customers and our community, and to continue to establish Service Titan as a thought leader in this space. So I'm not just to give everyone at home a little bit of an idea, like I'm not as numbers driven in that way because of the nature of my show, right? I think if I were to do a show again, I would probably be a little bit more intentional about how I want to plan episodes. Right. Yeah. Okay. Back to my thought. I know I'm like kind of going all over the place. Welcome to my brain. So I was saying Toolbox of the Trades weekly show. I go back and forth all the time as to whether or not it has to be weekly or has to be seasons, because we don't have those growth goals in mind. But right now we're a weekly show. So because of that, and because I don't just do podcasting at Service Titan, I also run our webinar channel, which is kind of a different version of podcasting in some capacity. Sometimes the weekly demand is a little too much. And I wish that, there have definitely been some episodes that have come out that I'm like, oh, that wasn't my best. So I think like moving forward, if I were to create my own show, I would be really intentional about what topics to cover on each episode. Like there have been times where my producer, who's an outside agency that we work with, Westport Studios, he's fantastic. His name is Rob. Like I did one string of like 15 episodes, and for whatever reason, like 5 of them were about CSRs, which are customer service representatives, like CSR best practices or something. And he's like, "Oh, did you plan that?" And I was like, "No, I absolutely didn't. That just happened." And that happened literally like 6 months ago. So I would say right now, like if it was my show, if I could do anything differently, it would be to probably like set expectations of like, this is not going to be a weekly thing, or I'm going to try and like manage breaks into that. So that's, I think I answered the question. What would I do differently? I would just probably do a bit more front end planning, if that makes any sense. So we don't do it great, I'll be honest. I wish we've done it better. I wish we could do it better. And I want to. There's this new tool that because I obviously listen to podcasts, right? I mean, imagine if I was someone who did podcasting, but like didn't engage in podcasts whatsoever. I genuinely really like podcasts. Probably because I live alone and it feels like I have friends. No, just kidding. I love the Handsome podcast, which is a comedy podcast with Tig Notaro, Fortune Feimster, and Mae Martin, which are 3 comics that I absolutely love. And it's just a very like low stakes, very chill podcast. Just feels kind of like you're hanging out with them. They started doing these bonus episodes on Friday where they take questions from listeners, and they do it through this tool called SpeakPipe, where you just like go into SpeakPipe and you record a question, and they select questions to answer, and they answer them for these like pretty little episodes, they call them, on Fridays. And I'm like, oh, that would be such a good thing for us to implement at Toolbox for the Trades. I have engaged with listeners in a couple ways. I've had listeners come on the show. So we have a thing on our website where it's like, hey, do you want to be a guest on the show, or do you want to submit someone to be a guest? So we always ask people to do that. I genuinely think that there's a lot of things I could be doing to better engage with my listeners. And yeah, I think like the answer to that, honestly, is like that's something that I think as a podcasting host I can do better with. I'm not doing as good as I could be doing with it right now. Oh, wow. Well, it kind of goes all back to like, well, what is the goal of your podcast? Do you want to hit into Apple's like top 100 podcasts? Do you want to develop a niche audience that's engaging with you on Facebook, on, Instagram, on TikTok, wherever? And if you do, then like, okay, how are you going to measure that? So for me, like if someone asked me like, how do I grow my podcast? I'd be like, well, what do you want the end goal to look like? What does growth look like for you? My producer will say that in order to grow your show, you must have a very consistent release schedule. So when I first started Toolbox for the Trades, I was like, I'm just going to do seasons. And then he strong-armed me recently to make it weekly. And I feel like for me, just with the bandwidth that my team has, like that sometimes is a little hard to maintain, considering that, like what I do for Toolbox of the Trades is also just one of the jobs I have at Service Titan, right? So I think it's always going to be specific, but I think like some definite like tired and true rules here is like define the tone of your show. If you have a format, I think formats are great. Like I start out every single one of my shows with an icebreaker, and an icebreaker that I love to ask is, if there was a song to be the soundtrack of your life, what would it be and why? I always love ending my episodes with, what could I have asked you to make this a better interview? So I try to keep my interviews structured a little bit, even though the content's always going to change. I always ask those 2 questions. Oh, and I always ask them how they got into the trades. So I think like having a consistent release schedule, having a solid format that your audience is replying to, I think, or is responding to, is good. And then also like figuring out who your audience is, like who specifically is it that you want to reach with this content? And then figuring out, okay, how can I reach these people? Where do these people live? I know there's also been some shows that have done like surveys and whatnot. And that's been, and like, to be very candid with you, we mainly promote Service Titan to like our community, our existing like user base and our subscribers. So it's like we have a pretty modest following. Because something else too, and like I'm going a little bit off topic here, but you know, when you're listening to a podcast and if you ever hear like a call to action on the podcast, like, oh, you know, please go here and fill out our survey, or here, please go whatever. And this is like kind of thinking about it from a marketing lens too. Like, oh my God, you realize like how hard it is for someone to like interrupt their flow and then to like go to a link or click a link. It's kind of tough. I know a lot of podcasts have had success with creating Facebook groups. We definitely had one for Toolbox of the Trades for a bit, but we were asked to shut it down because it didn't align great with the Service Titan brand for a couple of reasons I won't get into. There's another podcast that I like binged like a year or two ago. Oh my God, I have to tell you the name because it's actually a really good podcast, and it was like, oh my gosh, it was like a relationship podcast. I can see the logo. Oh my God, Andrew, I shit you not, I listened to this podcast like ad nauseum for like a year, and it'll come to me. But anyway, they had a really active Facebook group that I absolutely loved. And so like, that's a great example of figuring out, oh, Just Break Up. Love this podcast. Such a good podcast. They have a Facebook group that's super duper active. So, you know, going back to what I was saying, figure out figure out who you want your audience to be, where they live, and how you can make something that will get them engaged and get them, you know, excited to talk to you and to your other users. I have a horrible TikTok addiction, and I have found so many podcasts through TikToks, through like the, you know, like the 1, 2 minute, 30-second, like just little back and forth clips, which is like incredible. Like when we did Guilty Pleasure, the idea of putting the video version of our podcast like wasn't even on. I'm sure there were podcasts doing it, but like it wasn't as ubiquitous as it is now. And now I feel like, you know, every other video I scroll past, you've got like 2 people just in like this chair set up, just like, you know, casually yapping on a podcast, which is great. So, and like I've listened to podcasts that I've found through that medium. Like, oh my gosh, like this is actually, I really am interested in this conversation. And, you know, you listen to the show, you see if it's something that vibes with you. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And, you know, you go about your way. But there's a lot of different opportunities out there to connect with people and to find your audience. And I think it goes back to figuring out like what your brand is, what messaging you want to share, and just like staying true to that. If anyone throughout this interview has gotten interested in Service Titan or is Google Toolbox of the Trades, you should know that if you sign up for anything on that website, you will 100% get an email from Jackie at Service Titan. It's not me, but it is me. You know what I mean? Like, it's not me, but it is me. Service Titan has an annual user conference. And when I'm there, I am a de facto celebrity. It's weird. It's really weird. I moved to Los Angeles from New York to like become a comedy writer, and I'm now like weirdly famous in this like contracting niche. Life's weird. Life's crazy, man. A lot of people love to give me their self-published books. That feels like, and I'm just like, on one hand, I'm like, good for you, you did this, but also like, I'm never gonna read this book. Like, what do you want me to do with this book? I'm trying. Like, I've definitely had people come up to me and have had full-blown conversations with me, and I have no idea who they are. And I'm like, oh, wow. Yeah, no, I'm glad you got that out of that. But like, they have a parasocial relationship with me. So it's like, it's weird. It's a bit trippy for sure. And it really only happens like at this one specific event. And I'm really grateful for it. Like, what a privileged place to be, that I've made an impact enough on these strangers, essentially, that they recognize my voice, they recognize my face. But it's wild. So that is always trippy whenever that happens to me. Well, I already told you guys about Handsome. The thing with Handsome, though, that I don't think would work. So just for anyone who doesn't know, Handsome it's on the HeadGum network, and basically all they do is they get a famous person to ask a question, and they just answer the question. But like, they riff. It's very funny. I find that I would love to. I think I have two answers. Can I give you two answers to this? So I've always loved all of the stuff that comes out of. I love NPR's podcasts. There's a really awesome podcast called the LA Report, I think, or like Exploring LA, How to LA. I would love to be able to just like experience what it would be to produce a story for one of those types of shows, or just like work in a podcast, like in a narrative format. I have a very good friend. She's producing a fiction narrative-based podcast right now called Babalu, which will be out shortly. There was another amazing narrative podcast called Appearances that I was obsessed with. So I would just love to trade places with kind of any of those, just to see like, what is this like? I love the stuff that Serial puts out, and they're doing a freaking podcast about like the orca from Free Willy. I've come close to tears so often just listening to this podcast. And I'm like, I would just love to learn what it takes to create that. And then on the flip side, I would just love to trade places with the chick who hosts Call Her Daddy. I think her name is Alex something or other. Just because I think I would actually be pretty good at that. And I would love to know what it's like to have that type of reach, that type of influence. I'm sure it comes with a lot of crap that I probably don't want, but I would just like love to know what it's like. Oh my God. Fantastic. Again, oh my God. Literally anyone I already mentioned. I really love Mike Birbiglia's podcast. I think that's really good. Working It Out. I love Trixie Mattel and Katya from the Bald and the Beautiful podcast. That's a drag podcast. They're winners of RuPaul's Drag Race, and they're also like personalities. Oh my goodness. Have you ever listened to Science Versus? I would love to go on that show. Gosh, I have so many. Oh, and Spooked by Snap Judgment. It's like a Halloween show. I love it so much. But yeah, and as those shows, I would just be collaborating as Jackie. Start with your plan in mind, figure out who you want to reach, what message you want to send, like figure it out, and figure out like set up checkpoints for yourself at like 10, 20, 30 episodes to see if you're working towards the direction that you want to go, or if you want to pivot the message of your podcast or what you're trying to do. Or, give yourself time to decide if you actually like podcasting. It's a shit ton of work. It is so much work. I will say, when I went from guilty pleasure to doing it for Service Titan, the first thing I was like, I will happily do this, but you need to give me a production agency because I am not editing these episodes myself. So definitely like figure out your like who you want to target, like what message you want to say. Maybe like also like just do some internal digging and be like, why do you want to do this? Because of how much work it is. Front load as many episodes as you can. Figure out, if you want to release things in a season format, if you want to release things on a weekly, if you are going to release weekly, figure out like, okay, what days am I going to record? How am I going to, what like boundaries are you going to put in place to make sure that you're using your time as efficiently as possible? I definitely recommend the pre-interview process, especially if you're doing virtual interviews, to check people's setups and everything. And to get your potential guest comfortable with you as a host. The pre-interview like just helps them get more familiar with you. So this way, when the time comes, they'll hopefully be more comfortable with you when you're actually recording. The next thing I will say is listen back to yourself when you are doing these interviews or when you're producing in any way. I have become so hyper aware of what some of my key filler phrases are. I'll say, oh, that's awesome, or that's so great, or I can, whenever I do an or a like, which I know I've probably done, like, I just did one there. I've probably done a million just throughout this episode. Just did it. There it is. You know, you're going to become incredibly familiar with how you talk. So listen back to yourself, see where you can make some improvements, and, you know, be gentle with yourself. If I listen to a podcast, the first podcast I ever did for Guilty Pleasure, which literally sounds like a torture device, so I will not be doing that to myself. But I'm sure if I did that, I would find ways I could have improved. I'm sure if I listened to the last episode that we just published for Toolbox for the Trades, I could find ways I improve. I will also say that if you do some sort of interview, right, as a host, it's your job to bring the energy. And that can be a really emotionally draining job. It's amazing to me how exhausted I get after interviews. So be mindful, figure out a time of the day where, you know, you are your most effective. Be mindful of how your habits impact how you're able to show up for this type of job, because you're creating a vibe, you're creating energy. And if you're not showing up at your best, it is going to come through. I can just being completely candid, I'm able to tell, listening back to old episodes. Oh yeah, you went drinking the night before. So like, just be mindful of that. And then, I mean, above all, have fun with it. I'm completely humbled and privileged that I make money doing this. Like I said, though, I also have other roles and responsibilities at my job that go beyond podcasting. If you don't like this, you know, just don't do it. I think you got to bring a lot of passion for the medium of podcasting in order to do it successfully. So I think those are my big tips. Oh yeah, and format. I think for trying to figure out an episode format and trying to figure out your niche, who you're trying to contact, like who you're going to try to reach out to, I think you're just getting those North Stars in place will really help you down the line. One thing I'll say, I already mentioned I'm a giant fan of podcasting. There are podcasts that I've listened to religiously for 2 years, and then all of a sudden I stopped. There's podcasts that, you know, they've changed a little bit and I'm not as into them, and that's okay. There's podcasts I've left and then picked back up. There's one podcast from this author, Nora McInerney, called Terrible Thanks for Asking. And it was a really beautiful show. The whole concept of the show was about processing and acknowledging grief. Nora had lost her first husband to brain cancer when she was like 33 or 35 or something. Absolutely horrible. And she kind of used the show called Terrible Thanks for Asking to highlight people going through some of the darkest periods of their life. Wow, what a feel-good podcast, Jackie. Thanks so much for the recommendation. No, it was great because it it just kind of acknowledged that like life is hard, but it can also be like messy and beautiful, blah, blah, blah. This is all to say something Nora said, which has always stuck with me, because I think a lot of people can look at how many podcasts are out there and say like, oh my God, well, why would I do it? Like people have done this before, or even if it's a concept that you've seen be done before, even if it's been done before, it's never been done by you. So like, just freaking do it. I was like pulling podcast stats the other day, and it's like, I think most shows don't like exist past like 30 episodes or something. So, you know, don't let perfection get in the way of you trying to build something, and don't get in your head about, well, if this has already been done before, so why would I do it? It's never been done by you, so do it. So those are my final words.